The story begins with a hideout, which is a group of 4 members, 3 men and a beautiful woman. They drank and enjoyed themselves. A man pulled out a briefcase with only money inside. This is a lot of money. As they were having fun, a group of armed men entered their hideout. They were dressed in black and covered their faces so they wouldn't know their identity. It entered the front part of the hideout. He shot the man, and the armed men entered. They raised their hands and looked down at their eyes. An armed man told them to give them the briefcase with only money. The woman was scared and she was crying. A man looked at the face of the armed man and he recognizes it. The gunman took off a man's clothes. He saw the tattoo on the man's chest. He shot and killed the rest of the people. The woman was the same. The man who pulled the gun was shot in the chest. A man suddenly entered and pointed a gun at the armed men, not doubting that the armed men would shoot him, and died. 2 women escaped from the hiding place. The armed men saw it and chased it. They got into their car to get there and shoot it while running but can't hit it. The armed men got out of the car. They were looking for the 2 women who escaped. She hid under the dark side of the bridge. The armed men did not see them here. The women were terrified. The armed men heard the sound of police and they hurried off and fled. A man was working on a beach. He was running until he returned home. He was still working. It lifts heavy objects and then bathes and dresses. He eat while listening to the radio and take his medicine. His name is Joe. It was reported that what happened in a hideout. A lot of people are going to be out of that hideout. Joe went to work. He's a policeman. He arrived at the headquarters and went inside. The man who had been on the phone with the policeman had dropped in to greet Joe. He entered the captain's office. This video was shown and he looked at what he had done. This is how the suspect is arrested. Joe pressed his head against the door of the car over and over again until his companion accepted him. The captain laughed at Joe's actions. He said the term Mexican lowlife. They then went to a conference. The captain's secretary said it was going to start and they had to attend. As they walked into the conference room, they talked about Joe's behavior. They heading to the elevator when they reach on the right floor. They went out and entered the conference room. A woman was speaking in the conference room and the topic was about the incident. The captain was called in to explain. The cameras flashed, taking every photo. The captain finished explaining and the conference was held. Joe went to a bar. He knew his owner, and his friend saw the press conference that took place. They sat down and drank wine. They were drunk and left the bar. They went to the parking lot and Joe was being held by his companion because he was drunk. A car parked and smashed Joe's car. Joe saw it and went to him, looking for a license. The guy looks Mexican. The ice cream made Joe feel bad. He got out of the car and went home. The next morning, Joe went to the Tecate border crossing. The line at the crossing is long. He was still drowsy and he saw the faces of the wanted men posted on the side of the wall. He was already inside the border and handed his gun to the front desk. A Mexican policeman talks to Joe and introduced himself. This police officer is a federal agent. After the conversation, they immediately left the border and got into a car. They went to a prison where they met 2 female witnesses. As they were going there, the federal agent told him about his life. They were there and Joe saw that there were a lot of people trapped there. A van came and the passengers got off. The 2 women got into the car. They will be transferred to the U.S. to protect them. They left and went back to the border. A police car followed them and hit Joe's car. The police stopped the car. Joe's companion said they were federal agents. The police fired a gun and shot the federal officer. He was hit in the head, and Joe had blood on his face. The federal agent died, the car stopped and the police shot him. These guys are just pretending to be police, they're not really police. They shot at Joe's car and hit a female witness but she died. Joe was also hit by the tie-in. He went downstairs and fell down. He saw the foot of a police officer. He shot it. It collapsed. Joe stood up to shoot another colleague pretending to be a policeman. He killed them. Joe called his captain and told him what had happened. He also said he needed a backup. He hung up the phone and got into the car. Joe's face was covered in blood, and his clothes were covered in blood as well, while a woman who witnessed her was crying because her companion died. Joe dropped a female witness. He opened the car door to get down. When asked if the man was dead, the woman said he was dead. The woman got out of the car. Joe was slowly getting weak from the bullet and asks the woman to get a first aid kit out of the car. Joe slowly fell to the ground. She came back with first aid. He took the bandage and wrapped around Joe's wound and his eyes were darkened. They were in a car. Joe was taken to the sister's house and he is awake. He saw a Mexican man watching over him. Joe asked, but he didn't understand. His hand was on the bed. The woman came to the scene with the police, his brother. The police said Joe needed to rest, but he was getting angry and raised his voice. As he was relaxing, Joe was watching over him. He was talking about it. The fat man stood up and the old woman came in and brought food to Joe. She reached for it to Joe and ate it. While the old woman waited, she sat down and watched television. Joe was grateful for this. The woman was trying to get Joe's attention. She took it off and put it on alcohol. Joe said that those who wanted to kill him were Mexicans. She didn't like it because she was a Mexican. She said you weren't Mexicans, they were American policemen. She also told me what happened the night she saw how people were killed in the hideout. The woman was angry with Joe. He got up and left, but before he could get out of the door, he apologized, so he went back and finished fixing the bandage to Joe. She came back and told Joe that she wanted to take him to the U.S. border. He also asked if he could really protect her. Joe answered this and said that the police in the U.S. are doing too strictly. She picked up Joe's phone and called her captain. Joe explained his situation and where they were. Joe was taken off the hook, brought him new clothes and clothes. They ate together at the table and sat down. A car came and there were armed men. It was a lot and the police saw it as the sister's brother. Joe was taken to the room and re-examined. They fired guns at the men who were armed outside. One of the men was hiding behind the car. The armed men surrounded them and shot them. Their houses were destroyed. They exchanged gunfire. They hit the armed men outside. They died. Joe said armed men were walking around the back of the house. Joe shouted that he needed a key to get away. The key was given to the brother. The brother went to the room where Joe was. The man shot the men behind his house and died. The gunman shot the policeman's brother. Joe shot the man who killed the police brother and killed him. He took the key and released himself. He went to the policeman's sister. He could have shot it, but Joe had already killed the enemy. The armed men saw the woman and her mother. It was about to be shot, but Joe stabbed him to death. Another escaped the armed men. He got into the car and left. Joe trying to shot it, but he didn't shoot it. He and the girl had to leave because they weren't safe there anymore. The policeman gave the keys to the car. The woman's mother had the money. They were already holding each other before leaving. They went to the city and stopped at a phone booth. Joe called his friends. They spent the night in a hotel and went to sleep. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. Joe woke up and stood up to look at it. He picked up the gun and opened the door. He saw his friend. He walked in and asked if there was one. The group was with him. Joe looked out to see his friends and he waved at him. They left the hotel and the woman and Joe got in the car and left. As they walked away, they were in awe. Joe was so excited because he was his friend. The woman saw the bracelet of one of Joe's friends. It reminded of the armed men who killed people inside the hideout. The woman spoke Mexican, but Joe couldn't understand. His friends laughed at him. The woman comes up to Joe and whispers. The woman says they are the people who killed people inside the hideout. Joe said that if they could talk to each other, so he stopped the car on one side and got off. Joe said the incident in the hideout. The armed men were armed that night. Joe grabbed the gun and took his gun. They also took the woman out of the car. She was shot and with a gun. Turns out that Joe's friends had an agreement that they would just take Joe home and kill the girl. A friend of Joe's changed his mind. Joe shoots a gun and intends to kill him. One of Joe's friends grabbed the gun and shot it. He was a friend of him, but Joe was hit and fell. They hit each other. Joe grabbed the gun and shot his friend and died. The gun was pointed at the woman. Joe's friend could have grabbed the trigger, but Joe caught it. He shot it and died. They got out of the car and went to the city. They had to cross the border but knew they wouldn't be allowed to enter it, so at night they joined the group of people who were planning to go the secret way into the border. They walked there until the morning and saw the American flag and everyone shouted, but a police car came and knocked them down and raised their hands. 5 months later, Joe returned home and dealt with his cases. The captain saw it and nodded. They talked and the woman eventually became an American citizen, and Joe saw them, and that's where the story ends. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing, giving it a thumbs up, and turning on notifications for more updates. Your support means a lot.